Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name is Lon Rising and I'm going to be your host for this episode, and damn, I've missed doing that. On this edition, we're going to be talking about a game that has taken me a long time to talk about. I've actually had this game since early September of 2019, I believe. Picked it up, played it, picked it up, played it, picked it up, played it, couldn't really get to grips with it, then got to grips with it. And now, where to begin? Demoniaca, Everlasting Night. Demoniaca is a dark, gothic, mature and sexy RPG inspired by the Castlevania series. Explore, fight, meet new friends and avenge those who brought you unbearable pain and loss. Released on the 19th of September 2019, developed by Aki and published by Valkyrie Initiative, Demoniaca offers exploration of a dreadful and corrupted Tower of Babel. Find all its secrets, challenge its powerful masters, and slay hordes of their minions. It claims to offer transparent, fluent, and deep combat with quote-unquote easy to learn but hard to master. Each enemy and battlefield is different and handcrafted. It has a generous variety of potions, gears, skills, and moves that will allow you to customize your playstyle. The world and characters of Demoniaca are grim, but also beautiful and sexy, and are made with love and leave no one untouched. It also includes mature and graphic content. Players can expect depictions of graphic violence, nudity, and blood. So now we've got the formalities out of the way. Oh, come here. I really wanted this game to be good. Like really. As a reviewer, I'm supposed to be non-biased, somewhat, bipartisan to a certain degree. I really, really wanted this game to be good. But it's annoying as balls! Okay, before I go down the rabbit hole of getting too angry about this game, let's start with what the game does well. That's fair, right? That's fair. We'll start with what it does well. The game has an absolutely wonderful art style. I mean, graphically, this game from the top to the bottom has charm, charisma, style, and attention to detail that is second to none. Absolutely amazing designs of both the main character, who's a badass by the way, the backgrounds which I find deep and characterful, the enemies that have a wide variety of different looks, poses, actions, sound effects, move sets, but all look glorious and gory and detailed. It's a massive, passionately designed and overwhelmingly well crafted just aesthetic. The aesthetic, I love the aesthetics of this game. Not to mention the flourishes and the effects of the attacks and all these things that help feed into the nature of badassery, the over-the-topness that, again, I would link to One Finger Death Punch 2 in the sense that, yes, maybe it's not the most complex when you break it down, but the game does everything in its power to try and make you feel like a badass by overwhelming you with massive effects, sound effects, and flourishes and poses. It's great. And the soundtrack is fantastic. Hard-hitting, rock-inspired, just you feel like you're on a revenge quest even before you start beating up the first enemy. The game, again, does everything in its power to try and grasp this theme, this sense of badassery is the only word I can think to describe it, but it's really good at doing that. Moving on, the depth of its inventory, the number of different choices you can make in terms of what kit you can equip. So you can have necklaces, rings, bracelets, orbs and spheres, and all these things help to diversify the gameplay by changing the stats of your character. The stats of your character feed into how the game is going to ultimately unfold. You've got stats that determine how strong you are, how fast you are, what your defensive capabilities are, your intelligence, your demon bar, whatever that's called, basically the powers that you have and what limitations you have on those powers, and they help change those levels. They can deduct one but add more to another. They can add to your drop rate, your health regeneration, your experience regeneration, because you gain experience in this game. I love that fact, by the way. The fact that you gain experience as the game progresses, that's absolutely fantastic. I also love the fact that it's wide ranged. Again, the castle is huge. There's tons to do and explore, tons of different places. And even though I've seen some criticism say that the castle feels bland, I would counter that. I would say that the castle may look similar in different stages, but each of the platforming sections feel different. There's a different element to them that makes them feel taller, wider, more maze-like. There's just, I don't agree with that critique, because again, there is a diversification in the backgrounds, albeit it's subtle. And the background diversification isn't so much in like it's one's pink, one's blue, one's green, one's yellow. It's more, there's more enemies in this one. There's more bosses in this one. This one has more lateral movement. This one has larger areas for combat missions. So the diversification in its gameplay is certainly there too. And certainly it has a deep array of moves. There's no denying that fact. There's probably 36 moves in the game that are completely independent of each other. Barring just spamming the punch and kick buttons, you've got a myriad of different attacks that you can utilize that both have combination maneuvers and have demonic powers that feed into that bar again. And this is where the comparison of the game is, that it's a Castlevania game, but with fighting game elements. It's a character that can utilize fighting game mechanics in almost an open world environment. And I've wanted a game like this since I first played Tekken Force. The idea of taking a fighting game character, fully fleshed with all their moves at their disposal, and just letting them loose on a bunch of untrained imbeciles kind of appeals to me, because it feeds into that, again, badassery of you having all these amazingly elaborate moves, these guys being completely unable to stop you. But in other games with hack and slashers or beat 'em ups, the tendency has always been to limit the moveset and keep it fairly repetitive and simplistic, which gets boring after a while. The game's the only recourse is to just amplify the moves, making them bigger and more audacious the more you get into the game. In this game, and in games like this, they attempt to just keep it simple with the character, but let you have a full moveset, which allows you to just find different ways of taking different enemies down depending on what their strengths and weaknesses are. And I really love that concept. I'm a massive fan of that concept, and I'm glad that this game took the time to try and take a stab at it. Yeah! Bad girl.
Well, we're waiting.
But here's where it goes horribly wrong. You see, the game has two massive flaws in its design. And they're the two it really doesn't need to have, considering it's a platformer and a fighting game. It's platforming and it's fighting. You see, the trouble is, in any platforming game, you have to make sure that the platforming is fun. And any fighting game, you need to make sure that the fighting is fun. And in both of these instances, neither are the case. Neither. And after everything that I've just said, you might be thinking, how can that be the case? The game gets everything right. It gets everything right in terms of how well crafted it is, how deep it is, how much thought went into the game, how much diversification in the gameplay there is. Two problems. Number one, the platforming is clunky, numb, unresponsive, and doesn't have a climb. Why would you have platforming in a game that is as bad as this, but not even think to have a climb button? Why? It makes every platforming session infuriating, because unless you mount it first time, make the distance, you'll spend sometimes a minute just bouncing back and forth between two platforms trying to get up. Does that sound fun to you? And then we come to the fighting. The fighting. At first, you can understand and appreciate that you are new to this castle. You have no abilities, you have the bare minimum essentials of what abilities you will later have in the game. Therefore, it stands to reason that a lot of the monsters, they're going to kick your ass. Even on the easiest difficulty, they're going to make mincemeat out of you. So the common tactic isn't necessarily to fight, it's to pick them apart guerrilla style. Chip away at their health, bound across them, move, maneuver, parry, which is a massive component of the combat. I can't emphasize that enough. You need to marry the parry button, okay? Because if you don't, you'll get monstered even more quickly than what I'm about to describe. But nevertheless, the parry button is your bestest friend in the whole wide world. But in the early stages, when your abilities are low, your attack capacity is low, your demon bar is low, your defense is low, and your moveset is limited, you need to be much more strategic in your fighting than you might think you need to be in a game that's platform. Because that's the misleading thing. Because it's a platform, you've got to think that the enemies, they're going to die in a couple of hits, right? No, a lot of these enemies are full health. You're going to need to stand there in an actual prolonged encounter and take them down, which isn't easy in the off. But you think, you persevere, you learn some moves, you get better at the game, you'll sooner or later develop into a badass, fearsome warrior, right? Well, I'm 2 minutes into a rant, so you gotta know that that's not the case. The biggest problem is that it's the same with every other game that I come across that attempts to present a challenge but without thinking for 2 seconds, is it fun and is it fair? The combat in this game is fundamentally broken because your character needs to be sharp. If you're gonna have that type of combat in your game where your character is subject to hordes of fully powered, full strength enemies that are able to hit as hard as you, hit as quickly as you, but don't get effects and don't get stunned like you can, then the controls have to be razor thin. They have to be on point. They have to do what you tell them to do when you tell them to do it. And this game is so willfully unresponsive. For instance, the parry button that I referenced earlier, your bestest friend will get ready for that mother to break your heart on a consistent basis because the game is not responsive to your commands in real time. You'll be battling an enemy, pressing the B button to parry and block the attacks. Now, if you're lucky and you press it well in advance, you'll parry, and that saves you a lot of damage. It means that you can sustain a tremendous amount of punishment. Here's the problem though. What's that? You want to fight back? You want to throw a punch at him? You want to throw a kick at him? Well, I hope you realise that by doing that, you're going to take damage. Well, surely I can kick him and, especially if it's a quick attack, I can punch and parry with the time. No, that's not how this works. You get to throw a punch and take damage, or you get to parry and prolong the fight until you decide to punch and take damage or run away. Doesn't that sound like fun? You see, here's the problem. The combat is set up to favour the enemies, which is bad enough when it's one-on-one. But when there's like 5 of them on a screen, I'm thinking specifically in the library section where you have these cleaver carrying floating ghosts and books and these little yappy things that nip up at you and don't do a lot of damage, but they do break your combos. It's overwhelming. There's no attack, there's no burst attack, there's no quick attack that you can mount, there's no amount of blocking that you can do. You're overwhelmed. You have to pick them off one at a time. Now here's the other problem. Again, we come back to the other problem, the platforming. When the platforming is so numb, unresponsive and dull, it's so hard to maneuver across the field to enable you to get the advantage that you should have as the so-called superpowered badass, which is either quickness and speed or strength and resilience. You have neither. So when you're in these skirmishes getting your ass handed to you, your only recourse is to f*** off, is to teleport, jump, run as quickly as you can away from the danger. Does that sound like a badass to you? So you'll be getting your ass kicked over and over and over again. And because this is a Castlevania inspired game, there's no autosave. Which means that if you happen to have not made it to a save point, which by the way are hidden away in these hard to reach platforming areas, because of course platforming is super easy in this game, it means that you can lose tens of minutes, half an hour to an hour's worth of gameplay time if you're not careful, which is all that progress, all those items, all that experience flushed down the pan because there's no autosave. Not even on the easiest difficulty. I understand on the medium and the hard ones you might want to have an autosave mode because you want to make it hard for those hardcores that like piercing themselves in the nuts for fun. But for me, who just wants to complete the goddamn game and review it, it's so infuriating to be caught in the middle of 5 of these You're battling them along, you try to run away, and you can't. But let's now talk about this. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you do happen to make it through a section. Let's say you happen to make it past, you even happen to defeat some of these gits. Wait till you get a load of the bosses, because these motherfuckers ain't paying for nothing because they cheap as fuck. The first and only boss that I managed to take down was this giant head thing that kept on swooping from left to right. It just kept on knocking me over and over again. Just kept on knocking me over. And then there's other bosses scattered across the map. They're overwhelmingly powerful. You can't make a dent in them yet. And it's like, oh, just come back to them later. Why do I want to come back to them? I want to fight them now. Well, you're saying you put them there because just to demonstrate how much of a peon you are in this castle full of things. Right, let's calm down, shall we? Let's calm down. Let's maybe come back to some of the things that the game does well, shall we? I like the story and where it's going. The idea of a lady being attacked in a village, literally torn to pieces. Yet she's so much of a badass, she refuses to die and instead sews herself back together, like top half and bottom half, sews herself back together, finds a neat fitting outfit, which is bosom supportive, obviously. We'll come to that critique in a moment. But nevertheless, badass, blackout, and she's got the red hair, so she looks cool, and she charges into the castle and proceeds to kick some ass. Like that. Boxman, I like his design, I like his gimmick of being the sort of crazy master figure as well. I like that. The antagonistic figures as you go. There's a lot to this game's mystique and lore that I really love and enjoy, and I like exploring that, and I love the gothic nature of the design of it that feeds into that story. I like the leveling up mechanics. I like the fact that you can learn moves. I would prefer it if you could use the moves if you figured out what they were, but nevertheless, I understand that you've got to unlock the moves, and if progression wasn't so slow, that wouldn't be so annoying, but slow it is, you've got to progress and yada yada yada. But nevertheless, unlocking different moves and mechanics as you go, like the teleport, bringing a minion into existence, the various different supercharged moves, I love that as well. I'm not sure how to feel about the hypersexualization of women in this game though. Literally everywhere you look there's a tit or a set of them. Fine, I guess, but do you need to hypersexualize statues and columns? Yeah, I mean, I get maybe medieval, but the men aren't hypersexualized in this game. Maybe I'm being too woke about this, but I don't consider myself a particularly woke person and not that much of a wet flannel about this whole thing, but even I had to stop and say for a second, wow, there's an awful lot of boobs in this game that don't need to be there. So there's that, I suppose, which could be a positive or a negative depending on your particular viewpoint, but the hypersexualization in this game is certainly there for all to see. The fact that it has different modes to challenge you if you don't find the easy mode hard enough, which frankly is hilarious to me. But nevertheless, if you want to go on medium or hard, the fact that it's got those contingencies in place to make it difficult for you is great. And the fact that you can traverse the castle at your leisure. You can go from place to place, and so long as you've unlocked the various moves or the strength level that's required to get through the various doors, which is again a nice little puzzler touch. The fact that you can't get through certain areas until you've unlocked a certain ability, for instance, to teleport. There's elements. So there's areas where you can only punch through and you have to be able to punch a certain strength in order to get through. I like that because again, that adds level of progression. You've got to remember to go back to those areas. Same with the teleport, there's areas that you can't punch through. You have to teleport through, kind of like that too. I'm sure there's other areas as well that are only accessible by a larger jump or a vertical teleport or something along those lines, but I won't know because I won't ever find out. But nevertheless, the fact that this game has so much diversity to its gameplay, so much diversity to its maps, its enemies, its story, it's so deep. You get the impression that the developer got lost down the rabbit hole when they were designing the game, because clearly they went deep on it. Clearly, there's no denying that they put a tremendous amount of time, effort, and expense into making sure that the experience crafted here is second to none. It's just that they didn't take the time to peek their head above ground for 2 seconds to go, hey, how does the fighting feel? Hey, how does the platforming feel? Because that's the problem. Mechanically, there's nothing wrong with either of those two elements. The fighting on of its own works. You press the buttons, the character does the things. You press a jump, you press a climb, it works. But in real time, in practical application, the climbing and the jumping is so bad and so infuriating because you spend hours just trying to get up a goddamn ledge, and the fighting is so infuriating and so needlessly hard because you suffer stun damage, the enemies don't. They can break your combos, you can't break theirs. They can inflict damage upon you such as confusion, poison, turn you to stone, turn things old-fashioned, because apparently that's an effect. You can't do jack shit to them except for beat them. And it's annoying because if you were to maybe make it a more fair and balanced battlefield, let's say for the sake of argument you wanted to employ stun tactics, poison tactics, turn people to stone, have increased speed or strength, I wouldn't mind so much because you could genuinely tailor your style of game to taking down enemies in your own way, such as other RPGs where you're a heavy hitter, or you're quick, or you have certain abilities, or maybe you're magically imbued. This game has you level up, but even when I went back to the original stages, so let's say for the sake of argument you traverse and you want to go back and see how tough you are now compared to the first few enemies that you faced in the beginning of the castle, I guarantee you'll still go, oh, I'm really not all that much stronger, even though I'm probably 10 to 15 levels stronger than when I started. Enemies still take a significant amount of time to beat, and they still kick your ass as much as you kick theirs. The only difference is that you have a larger health bar to play with. So if I'm going to critique this game, it's a game that has every excuse, everything to brag about in terms of how beautiful it is, how well produced it is, how much depth there is to the game, how much value there is. It's $14.99 on Steam at the moment, pounds, not dollars, that's probably about 20 bucks. Which, by the way, for the depth of content and the quality of the game, I have no gripes about whatsoever. It's worth every penny of its sale value from that perspective. But from the perspective of someone that's looking for a fun game, a gratifying experience, something that is something that I got addicted to play because I loved how much I was playing it. Not because I became infuriated with playing it to the point where I was like, right, I have to will myself to play it again. I haven't experienced enough of this game in order to review it. I have to will myself through. Not to mention, by the way, the load times. Load times are criminal. When you die and you have to restart, it takes you about 2.5 minutes just to rebound back in. And when you die constantly, that's infuriating as well. It's just that the developer has clearly spent a lot of time on those elements, but not refining the two elements that make the gameplay fun. Those are the only, everything else is garnish on the meal. But those two elements are the meal. If the fighting and the platforming in your fighting platformer is annoying by its very nature because it doesn't add gratifying experience to the gamer, then it fails on its concept alone. So if I'm gonna rate this game, on its quality, its depth, its character, its style, its lore, its story, its value for money, it gets a 7 out of 10. The reason it only gets a 7, based on all of those things which are comparable to some of the best games I've played, including Exception and including Danger Action Speed Heroes, which are comparable in quality to this game and comparable in depth of content, and are priced about the same as well, by the way. In fact, I think this might be slightly more expensive, but still comparable in value. The reason is because those games, I got addicted to playing because they were fun as f***. This game, I had to hate play to get through to the point where I can now say, right, I can see what the developer's doing here, and I can see what... You should never be forced to grind through a bad game to get to its good bits. There's never been an excuse for a game to be bad to get to good. A game should just be fun, period. That's the point of a game. And that's why it's disappointing. I said at the beginning of the review, I really wanted this game to be good. And I really did. I remember reading the reviews and seeing the Defunct Games review on it as well, and thinking, I really hope this game is good. I really love the look and the concept and the design and the production. And it really isn't. And I'm sorry to say that. Even with a 7 out of 10 rating, I don't necessarily recommend this game for that price point because I don't know how much fun you're going to get out of it. If you're a Castlevania fan and you want to experience something a little bit different, maybe this is something for you. If you want to experience something that has fighting game elements, then maybe this game is for you as well, with platforming elements. But just know going in, this game is going to break your heart as much as it entertains you. And on that basis alone, it's hard to make that recommendation, even with everything that I've said about its quality, but its fighting game elements and its platforming let it down completely. So, whew, I need a cigarette, and I don't even smoke. Demoniaca, Everlasting Night. What are your thoughts? Have you played the game? Leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. Have you played Castlevania, and do you have Castlevania-esque memories that are maybe invoked by this game? Let me know what your thoughts are, because I've never played a Castlevania game, ever. So maybe I'm missing the point of this game to a certain degree, but nevertheless, I stand by every word of what I've just said. I felt I was reasonably restrained, even with the parts that have likely annoyed my neighbours. But nevertheless, thank you very much for watching this edition of the Halcyon Show. Please like, share and subscribe, and check out some of the other content creators in the description below. Feel free to go check me out over at Defunct Games, where I host a weekly Sunday edition of the news for gaming. It's fun. You should go check that out. Also on Tuesdays, I'm over at Two Beard Gaming, reviewing things now when I'm not yelling at the camera for half an hour like I do on my channel. So feel free to go check me out there. Thank you very much for watching. Sorry I've been away for a while. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. My name's been Lorne Risley, host of the Halcyon Show. Please like, share and subscribe again. I'm gonna go have a cigarette. I'll see you in the next episode.